Maya Rodriguez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent their weekends at the mall or gossiping about boys, she could be found at her grandfather's auto shop, her small hands covered in motor oil, as she learned to rebuild engines. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes were chosen for durability rather than fashion. She preferred the company of wrenches and spark plugs to makeup and jewelry. When Maya turned 18, she made a decision that shocked everyone in Millfield, Texas. She was going to join the military. Not just any military service, but the elite Special Forces training program that had recently opened its doors to women for the first time. Her parents were worried, her friends were confused, and her teachers tried to convince her to pursue a more traditional path. But Maya had always marched to the beat of her own drum. The day she walked into the recruitment office, the sergeant behind the desk did a double take. Maya stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. Her face was soft and youthful, with large brown eyes that gave her an almost innocent appearance. The sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Johnson, tried to steer her toward administrative roles or medical training, but Maya was firm in her decision. She wanted combat training, and she wanted to prove that women belonged on the front lines. The bus ride to Fort Braxton was long and uncomfortable. Maya sat quietly in her seat, watching the landscape change from familiar Texas plains to the rugged mountains of North Carolina. She was one of only 3 women among 40 recruits heading to the most demanding military training program in the country. The other 2 women seemed nervous, constantly checking their phones and whispering to each other. Maya simply stared out the window and mentally prepared herself for what was coming. Fort Braxton was exactly what she had imagined. Gray concrete buildings stretched across hundreds of acres, surrounded by intimidating fences topped with razor wire. The training grounds were vast and unforgiving, designed to break down recruits and rebuild them into elite soldiers. As the bus pulled through the gates, Maya felt a mixture of excitement and determination coursing through her veins. The first person she noticed when they stepped off the bus was Sergeant Marcus Stone. He was everything a drill instructor was supposed to be. Tall, muscular, and intimidating. His voice could shatter glass, and his glare could make grown men question their life choices. Stone had been training Special Forces candidates for over 15 years, and he had very strong opinions about women in combat roles. He believed the military was no place for females, especially not in elite units, where lives depended on physical strength and mental toughness. As the recruits lined up for their initial inspection, Stone walked slowly down the line, sizing up each candidate. When he reached Maya, he stopped and looked her up and down, with obvious disdain. She stood at attention, her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to let his intimidating presence affect her composure. Stone circled her like a predator examining its prey, his boots clicking ominously on the concrete. Well, Stone said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What do we have here? Looks like someone got lost on their way to a beauty pageant. A few of the male recruits snickered, but Maya remained perfectly still, her expression unchanged. Stone leaned in closer, his face inches from hers. Let me guess, Princess, you saw a movie about female soldiers and thought it looked fun? Or maybe you're here to prove some feminist point? Maya's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her military bearing. Stone continued his verbal assault, clearly enjoying himself. You might have a pretty face, sweetheart, but I guarantee you don't have the grit it takes to make it through my program. This isn't summer camp. This isn't a game. This is where we separate the warriors from the wannabes. He paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the line that would haunt Maya for weeks to come. Pretty face, no grit. That's all I see when I look at you, and pretty faces don't survive in combat zones. The words hit Maya like a physical blow, but she refused to give Stone the satisfaction of seeing her react. Instead, she stared straight ahead, her dark eyes burning with quiet determination. The other recruits shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh or feel sorry for Maya. Stone seemed to sense their discomfort and decided to make an example. You think I'm being too harsh? Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. In 6 months, most of you will be gone. Washed out. Sent home with your tails between your legs. But this one? He pointed at Maya with obvious contempt. This one won't last 6 weeks. Mark my words. As Stone moved on to terrorize the next recruit, Maya felt something ignite deep inside her chest. It wasn't anger exactly, though there was plenty of that. It was something deeper, more primal. It was the same feeling she had gotten as a child when other kids said she couldn't fix cars because she was a girl. Or when teachers suggested she take home economics instead of shop class. It was the fuel that had driven her to prove herself her entire life. That first night in the barracks, Maya lay awake on her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling. Around her, other recruits tossed and turned, some already questioning their decision to be there. The training hadn't even officially started, and several candidates were already talking about quitting. Maya could hear whispered conversations about how impossible the program seemed, how Stone was going to make their lives miserable, and how maybe they should consider easier career paths. But Maya wasn't thinking about quitting. She was thinking about every person who had ever underestimated her. Every time someone had told her she couldn't do something because she was too small, too young, or too female. She thought about her grandfather, who had taught her that your size doesn't determine your strength, and that real power comes from within. Most of all, she thought about Stone's words. Pretty face, no grit. The next morning brought their first taste of actual training. Stone roused them at 4:30 in the morning with ear-splitting screams and the sound of trash cans being thrown around the barracks. The recruits stumbled out of their bunks, disoriented and exhausted before the day had even begun. Stone stood in the center of the room like a demon lord surveying his domain, his eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure. "Rise and shine, ladies. Time to see what you're really made of," he bellowed. "You have exactly 10 minutes to get dressed, make your bunks, and be standing in formation outside. Anyone who's late gets to do an extra 100 push-ups. And trust me, you don't want to start your first day with extra push-ups." Maya was one of the first recruits ready, her bunk made with military precision and her uniform crisp and neat. She had spent the previous evening studying the training manual and memorizing the proper procedures. While other recruits fumbled with their gear, she stood calmly at attention, waiting for further instructions. Stone noticed her preparedness but showed no sign of approval. If anything, he seemed annoyed that she hadn't given him an excuse to single her out for punishment. The morning run was brutal. Stone led them on a 5-mile course through the mountains surrounding the base, setting a punishing pace that left many recruits gasping and struggling to keep up. Maya found herself running in the middle of the pack, her shorter legs working overtime to match the stride of her taller classmates. Her lungs burned, and her legs ached. But she refused to fall behind. Every time she felt like slowing down, she remembered Stone's words and pushed herself harder. By the time they returned to the base, 6 recruits had dropped out of formation, unable to complete the run. Stone showed no sympathy for their weakness, instead using their failure as a teaching moment for the rest of the group. "This is what happens when you don't prepare yourself mentally and physically," he announced. "Combat doesn't care if you're tired. The enemy doesn't care if you need a break. Either you can perform when it matters, or you become a liability to your team." As the weeks progressed, the training only got more intense. They learned hand-to-hand combat, weapons handling, survival techniques, and tactical operations. Stone pushed them beyond their limits every single day, weeding out the weak and the uncommitted. More recruits dropped out each week, their dreams of military glory replaced by the harsh reality of what elite training actually required. Maya struggled with some aspects of the training, particularly the physical challenges that favored larger, stronger candidates. She had to work twice as hard as most of her male counterparts to complete certain exercises, and Stone never let her forget it. He would stand over her during push-ups, counting slower when she was struggling, or make sarcastic comments about her technique during combat drills. But Maya also discovered that she had advantages her larger classmates lacked. Her smaller size made her more agile and harder to catch during evasion exercises. Her mechanical background gave her an edge when learning to operate and maintain complex equipment. Most importantly, Her years of proving herself in male-dominated environments had given her a mental toughness that many of her fellow recruits couldn't match. During hand-to-hand combat training, Maya found herself paired with recruits who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. Stone clearly enjoyed watching her get thrown around by larger opponents, often making comments about how real combat wouldn't be fair either. But Maya studied every technique obsessively, practicing her moves late into the night when the other recruits were sleeping. She learned to use her opponent's size and strength against them, finding ways to exploit their overconfidence and leverage physics to her advantage. One particular day stood out as a turning point. They were practicing defensive techniques, learning how to escape from various holds and restraints. Maya was partnered with Jake Morrison, a former college football player who stood 6 feet 2 inches and weighed nearly 200 pounds. Morrison was one of the recruits who had laughed when Stone first humiliated Maya, and he clearly didn't take her seriously as a training partner. Stone watched with obvious anticipation as Morrison grabbed Maya in a bear hug from behind, lifting her off the ground with ease. The exercise was supposed to teach recruits how to break free from restraints, but Morrison was applying far more pressure than necessary. Clearly trying to show off his strength, Maya struggled against his grip, her feet dangling helplessly in the air as Morrison squeezed tighter. "Come on, pretty face," Morrison whispered in her ear, loud enough for others to hear.
"Let's see that grit Stone was talking about." His comment drew laughter from some of the other recruits, and even Stone seemed amused by the display.
Maya felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger, but she forced herself to think clearly about her situation. Instead of continuing to struggle against Morrison's superior strength, Maya suddenly went limp, causing him to adjust his grip to support her dead weight. In that split second of readjustment, she drove her elbow back into his solar plexus with all the force she could muster. Morrison gasped and loosened his hold just enough for Maya to slip free and spin around to face him. Before he could recover, she swept his legs and sent him crashing to the ground. The training yard fell silent. Morrison lay on his back, winded and embarrassed, while Maya stood over him in a perfect fighting stance. Stone's expression was unreadable, but Maya could see something that might have been respect flickering in his eyes. The other recruits looked at her with newfound wariness, realizing that the small girl they had been underestimating might be more dangerous than they thought. From that day forward, Maya's reputation in the unit began to change. Recruits stopped making jokes about her size and started paying attention to her techniques. She became known as someone who could find creative solutions to problems that seemed impossible. But Stone's attitude toward her remained unchanged. If anything, he seemed to intensify his focus on her, as if her success only proved that he needed to work harder to break her down. As the first phase of training drew to a close, Maya had survived longer than Stone had predicted. She wasn't the strongest recruit, she wasn't the fastest, and she certainly wasn't the biggest. But she had something that many of her classmates lacked: an unshakable determination to prove that she belonged there. Every insult, every challenge, and every moment of doubt only made her more resolved to succeed. The night before their first major evaluation, Maya sat alone in the barracks, cleaning her gear and preparing for what would be the most challenging test of her military career so far. Tomorrow would determine whether she advanced to the next phase of training or was sent home in disgrace. As she ran a cloth over her rifle barrel, she thought about how far she had come from that first day when Stone had labeled her as just a pretty face with no grit. She was ready to show him exactly how wrong he had been. The evaluation course stretched across 10 miles of the most unforgiving terrain Fort Braxton had to offer. Maya stood with the remaining 28 recruits, all that was left of the original 40 who had arrived 3 months earlier. The early morning mist clung to the mountains like smoke, and the air was crisp enough to make their breath visible. This wasn't just a test of physical ability, it was designed to break their minds as much as their bodies. Stone stood before them in full combat gear, his face as hard as granite. "Today, you prove whether you belong in my program or whether you're just wasting my time," he announced. "This course will test everything we've taught you: navigation, combat skills, endurance, problem-solving, and most importantly, your ability to perform under extreme pressure." His eyes swept across the group, lingering for a moment on Maya with that familiar look of doubt. The course began with a 3-mile run through thick forest, carrying full packs and weapons. Maya had learned to pace herself over the months, understanding that starting too fast would leave her exhausted for the challenges ahead. She settled into a steady rhythm, her breathing controlled and her mind focused. Around her, some of the larger recruits were already pushing too hard, their heavy breathing and red faces showing they hadn't learned the lesson of endurance over speed. The first obstacle was a cliff face that required rope climbing skills. Maya watched as several recruits ahead of her struggled with the ascent, their greater body weight working against them. When her turn came, she approached the rope with confidence. Her smaller frame was actually an advantage here. Requiring less energy to pull herself up, she scaled the cliff with efficient movements, her grandfather's lessons about using mechanical advantage echoing in her mind. Morrison, the football player who had underestimated her during hand-to-hand combat training, was struggling halfway up the rope. His muscular build, which had been an asset in many previous exercises, was now working against him. Maya could see the strain in his face, the tremor in his arms, as he fought to continue climbing. She reached the top well before him, but instead of celebrating her small victory, she turned to help guide other recruits up the final stretch. The second phase involved a tactical problem-solving exercise. Each recruit was given a scenario where they had to rescue a wounded teammate from behind enemy lines using limited resources. Maya approached the problem methodically, drawing on her mechanical background to create improvised solutions. While other recruits tried to brute force their way through the challenge, she used her knowledge of physics and engineering to build a pulley system that made moving the injured dummy much easier. Stone observed her solution with grudging interest. He had been waiting for her to fail, expecting her smaller stature to finally prove insurmountable. Instead, she was consistently finding ways to overcome obstacles that were defeating much larger recruits. It was frustrating him in ways he hadn't expected, challenging his firmly held beliefs about women in combat roles. The midday portion of the evaluation included live-fire exercises that tested both marksmanship and the ability to function under pressure. Maya had always been a decent shot, but the stress of evaluation conditions made everything more difficult. Her first few rounds missed their targets, and she could hear Stone making comments to his assistant about her performance. Instead of letting the pressure overwhelm her, she took a deep breath and remembered her grandfather's advice about staying calm under pressure. She adjusted her stance, controlled her breathing, and began hitting her targets with increasing accuracy. By the end of the shooting exercise, she had achieved one of the higher scores in her group. Her hands were steady, her focus complete, and her confidence growing with each successful shot. The weapon felt natural in her hands now, an extension of her will rather than a foreign object to be controlled. The afternoon brought the most grueling test yet. Close-quarters combat scenarios where recruits had to navigate through a complex obstacle course while engaging multiple targets. This combined everything they had learned about tactics, physical fitness, and combat skills into one comprehensive challenge. Maya knew this would be her biggest test yet, as it played directly into the areas where her size might be a disadvantage. The course was set up like an urban warfare scenario, with buildings to clear, hallways to navigate, and targets that could appear from any direction. Maya approached each section with careful planning, using her agility and smaller profile to move through spaces that gave larger recruits trouble. She cleared rooms with precision, her movements economical and effective rather than flashy or aggressive. In one particular scenario, she found herself trapped in a narrow corridor with what appeared to be multiple hostile targets. The setup was designed to favor brute force and overwhelming firepower, exactly the kind of situation where her instructors expected her to fail. Instead, Maya analyzed the geometry of the space and realized she could use the walls and ceiling to move in ways that larger people couldn't. She climbed up into the rafters of the building, using her rock climbing skills to navigate above the expected line of sight. From this unexpected angle, she was able to neutralize the targets without ever engaging them in direct confrontation. When she emerged from the building, Stone was waiting with an expression she couldn't quite read. It might have been frustration, or perhaps the first hint of respect. As the day wore on, more recruits began to drop out or fail various portions of the evaluation. The combination of physical exhaustion and mental pressure was proving too much for many candidates. Maya watched as several people she had trained alongside for months finally reached their breaking point and rang the bell that signified their withdrawal from the program. Each dropout made Maya more determined to continue. She thought about every person who had told her she wasn't strong enough, fast enough, or tough enough to succeed in a man's world. The memory of Stone's initial assessment of her as having pretty face, no grit, burned in her mind like fuel, pushing her forward when her body wanted to quit. The final phase of the evaluation was perhaps the most challenging. A hand-to-hand combat tournament, where each recruit had to face multiple opponents in succession. This wasn't about fancy techniques or martial arts showmanship. It was about the kind of brutal, exhausting fighting that could happen in real combat situations. Maya knew this would be her ultimate test, facing opponents who were bigger, stronger, and heavier than she was. Her first opponent was Rodriguez, a stocky recruit from California who had been consistently strong in physical challenges. He approached the fight with confidence, clearly expecting an easy victory against the smallest person in their group. Maya had learned to use this underestimation to her advantage over the months of training. She let Rodriguez come at her aggressively, then used his momentum against him, redirecting his force rather than trying to match it directly. The fight was quick and decisive. Rodriguez's overconfidence led him to overcommit to his attacks, leaving him off balance and vulnerable to Maya's counterstrikes. She put him down with a combination of throws and precise strikes to pressure points, techniques that relied on skill rather than brute strength. The watching recruits began to murmur among themselves, realizing that Maya had become a much more formidable opponent than they had initially believed. Her second fight was against Williams, a recruit who had been paying attention to her previous victory and came prepared for a more tactical battle. This fight lasted longer, with both combatants circling each other carefully and looking for openings. Williams was smart enough not to rush in blindly, but Maya's months of intensive training had honed her ability to read opponents and anticipate their movements. When Williams finally committed to an attack, Maya was ready. She slipped his punch, got inside his guard, and used a leverage-based throw that sent him tumbling to the ground. Before he could recover, she had him in a submission hold that forced him to tap out or risk serious injury. The crowd of watching recruits was silent now, understanding that they were witnessing something unexpected and impressive. Stone watched these victories with growing amazement and, though he would never admit it, concern. His carefully constructed narrative about Maya's inadequacy was crumbling before his eyes. Every assumption he had made about her limitations was being proven wrong, and it was forcing him to confront some uncomfortable truths about his own prejudices. Maya's third opponent was Jackson, one of the strongest recruits in their class and someone who had been vocal about his belief that women didn't belong in special forces training. He approached the fight with grim determination, knowing that losing to Maya would be humiliating in front of his peers. This was exactly the kind of opponent Maya had been preparing for. Someone bigger, stronger, and motivated by pride rather than respect. The fight began with Jackson trying to use his reach and strength advantages to keep Maya at a distance while looking for an opportunity to end the match quickly. Maya recognized his strategy and responded by constantly changing angles, making it difficult for him to land clean strikes. She absorbed a few hits in the process of getting inside his guard, but her conditioning and pain tolerance had improved dramatically over months of training. When Maya finally got close enough to engage, the fight became a test of technique versus strength. Jackson tried to grab her in a bear hug similar to what Morrison had attempted months earlier. But Maya was ready for this type of attack. She used his grip against him, creating leverage that allowed her to throw him despite his size advantage. The sound of Jackson hitting the ground seemed to echo through the training area. As Jackson struggled to get back to his feet, Maya was already positioning for her next attack. She had learned to chain her techniques together, never giving larger opponents time to use their strength advantage. A quick series of strikes to nerve clusters left Jackson partially paralyzed in his left arm, and a follow-up sweep sent him down again. This time, he stayed down. The silence that followed Maya's third consecutive victory was deafening. The remaining recruits looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear, finally understanding that the small girl they had initially dismissed was perhaps the most skilled fighter among them. Stone's expression had evolved from skepticism through frustration to something approaching genuine surprise. But Maya's day wasn't over yet. The tournament format meant that winners continued fighting until there was only one person left standing, and she still had several more opponents to face. Each fight became progressively more difficult, not just because her remaining opponents were the strongest recruits, but because exhaustion was beginning to take its toll on her smaller frame. Her fourth fight was against Thompson, a military brat who had been training in various martial arts since childhood. This was Maya's most technically challenging opponent, someone who understood leverage and technique as well as she did. The fight went longer than any of her previous matches, with both fighters demonstrating high levels of skill and tactical thinking. Thompson was smart enough to target Maya's growing fatigue, trying to wear her down with longer exchanges and forcing her to work harder for each position. Maya recognized the strategy and adjusted accordingly, looking for opportunities to end the fight quickly rather than getting drawn into a war of attrition she couldn't win. The decisive moment came when Thompson attempted a complex takedown that required perfect timing and execution. Maya read the attempt just early enough to counter it, using Thompson's own momentum to reverse the position and put him in a dangerous submission hold. Thompson had to choose between tapping out or risking a broken arm, and he made the smart choice. As Maya stood over her fourth defeated opponent, she could see the respect in the eyes of everyone watching. These weren't victories won through luck or trick techniques. They were demonstrations of superior skill, tactics, and mental toughness. The recruits who remained knew they were watching something special, a performance that challenged everything they thought they knew about combat effectiveness. Stone found himself in an uncomfortable position. Every instinct told him that what he was witnessing shouldn't be possible. A 120-pound woman shouldn't be systematically defeating much larger male opponents in hand-to-hand combat. It went against everything he believed about physical advantages and combat effectiveness. Yet here she was, making it look almost easy. Maya's final opponent was Patterson, the largest and strongest recruit in their entire class. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing over 220 pounds, he represented the ultimate test of whether technique could overcome raw physical advantage. Patterson had been watching Maya's previous fights carefully, studying her techniques, and looking for weaknesses he could exploit. The final fight began with Patterson showing Maya more respect than any of her previous opponents had. He didn't rush in blindly, or try to overwhelm her with strength alone. Instead, he used his reach advantage to keep her at distance, forcing her to work for every opportunity to get close enough to engage effectively. Maya realized this would be her most challenging fight yet. Patterson's combination of size, strength, and intelligence made him a formidable opponent, and her accumulated fatigue was beginning to affect her speed and reaction time. She would need to be perfect in her technique and timing if she wanted to win this final match. The fight continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Both fighters were careful and methodical, looking for the one mistake that could end the match. Maya used every technique she had learned, every trick she had developed, and every advantage her smaller size could provide. Patterson countered with patient aggression, using his physical gifts while respecting her demonstrated abilities. The end came suddenly and unexpectedly. Patterson thought he had Maya trapped against the edge of the fighting area and moved in for what should have been a decisive attack. Maya used the boundary to her advantage, rebounding off the edge with a spinning movement that caught Patterson completely off guard. Her strike landed perfectly, and the big recruit crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he hit the mat. The training area erupted in amazement. Maya stood in the center of the fighting space, exhausted but victorious, having defeated every single opponent put in front of her. The recruits who had initially laughed at Stone's assessment of her as pretty face, no grit, were now looking at her with something approaching awe. Stone stood frozen, watching this small woman who had just systematically destroyed every assumption he had made about her capabilities. The evaluation was over, and Maya had not just passed. She had dominated in a way that forced everyone present to reconsider their understanding of what made an effective warrior. As Maya finally allowed herself to show her exhaustion, sitting down heavily on a bench while medics checked on her defeated opponents, she caught Stone's eye across the training area. For the first time since she had arrived at Fort Braxton, she saw something in his expression that might have been doubt about his own judgment. The real test, she knew, was still coming. The weeks following the evaluation changed everything at Fort Braxton. Maya's complete domination of the combat tournament had become legendary among the recruits, and word of her performance had spread throughout the entire base. Soldiers from other units would point her out when she passed by, whispering about the small woman who had defeated every opponent in hand-to-hand combat. Her reputation had transformed from a curiosity to something approaching reverence. But Stone remained unconvinced. If anything, Maya's success seemed to have hardened his resolve against her. He couldn't deny her technical proficiency or her results, but he found new ways to challenge her, new tests designed to expose what he believed must be fundamental weaknesses in her character or capabilities. He increased the intensity of her training, assigned her additional duties, and scrutinized her performance with an attention that bordered on obsession. During morning inspections, Stone would spend extra time examining Maya's equipment, looking for any excuse to find fault with her preparation. During tactical exercises, he would place her in the most difficult positions, forcing her to work with inferior equipment or incomplete intelligence. When other recruits made mistakes, they received standard corrections. When Maya made even minor errors, she faced extended lectures about the importance of perfection in combat situations. The other recruits began to notice Stone's obvious bias, and it was affecting the entire unit's morale. They respected Maya's abilities and couldn't understand why their instructor seemed determined to make her life miserable despite her consistent excellence. Some of the bolder recruits even began to quietly express their support for Maya, understanding that Stone's treatment of her was unfair and potentially detrimental to unit cohesion. Maya endured Stone's increased attention with the same calm determination she had shown since arriving at Fort Braxton. She understood that proving herself once wasn't enough. She would have to prove herself every single day until Stone finally accepted that she belonged in his program. Each morning, she woke up ready to face whatever new challenge he had devised, treating his skepticism as motivation rather than discouragement. The opportunity for a final confrontation came during an advanced combat training exercise designed to simulate real battlefield conditions. The scenario involved clearing a hostile compound using teams of 2 recruits working together. Stone had been saving this particular exercise for when he felt the remaining candidates were ready to face the most realistic combat simulation possible. As he announced the team assignments, Stone's intentions became clear. Instead of pairing Maya with another recruit, as he did with everyone else, he assigned her to work alone against multiple opponents. The exercise was supposed to test teamwork and coordination, but Stone was using it as an opportunity to place Maya in an impossible situation where failure seemed inevitable. "Rodriguez," Stone announced to Maya, using her last name as he did with all the recruits. "You'll be clearing the compound solo. Consider it a special challenge for someone with your demonstrated abilities." His tone carried a mixture of sarcasm and challenge that everyone in the unit could hear. "If you're as good as your evaluation results suggest, this should be easy for you." The other recruits exchanged glances, recognizing the unfairness of the assignment. The exercise was specifically designed for 2-person teams, and attempting it alone would be extremely dangerous even for the most skilled operator. Maya understood what Stone was trying to do, but she also recognized it as an opportunity to finally settle their ongoing conflict once and for all. "Understood, Sergeant," Maya replied calmly. "When do I begin?" Her acceptance of the challenge surprised some of the other recruits, who had expected her to protest the obviously unfair treatment. But Maya had learned over the months that arguing with Stone was pointless. The only way to earn his respect was through performance, and this exercise would give her the opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities under the most challenging conditions possible. Stone outlined the scenario in detail. The compound contained multiple rooms with unknown numbers of hostile targets. Maya would have to clear each room systematically, neutralize all threats, and extract a simulated hostage from the final location. She would be armed with standard equipment and have access to tactical gear, but she would have no backup, no communication support, and no room for error. As Maya prepared for the exercise, checking her equipment and mentally rehearsing her approach, Stone gathered the other recruits to observe from a safe distance. He wanted them to witness what he believed would be Maya's first major failure, a demonstration that individual skill couldn't overcome the fundamental requirements of combat operations. In his mind, this would finally prove his point about women in special forces roles. The compound was actually a sophisticated training facility designed to replicate real-world combat environments. The rooms were filled with obstacles, blind corners, and targets that could appear unexpectedly from any direction. Multiple cameras captured every angle of the exercise, allowing instructors to review performances and identify areas for improvement. Maya knew that every move she made would be recorded and analyzed, adding psychological pressure to an already dangerous situation. Maya approached the first room with methodical precision. Instead of rushing in aggressively, she used her small size to her advantage, moving quietly and using concealment to observe the space before committing to any action. She identified 3 targets positioned to catch intruders in a crossfire, then used her agility to move through the room in a way that eliminated them one by one, without exposing herself to multiple threats simultaneously. Stone watched her progress on the monitoring screens with growing unease. Maya's approach was textbook perfect, demonstrating tactical awareness and technical skill that exceeded many experienced soldiers. She was making the exercise look easy, flowing through spaces with an efficiency that suggested she understood urban combat better than he had given her credit for. The second room presented a different challenge: multiple levels and vertical obstacles that required both climbing ability and 3-dimensional tactical thinking. Maya's rock climbing background served her well here, allowing her to use elevated positions that larger operators might find difficult to access. She cleared the room from above, using angles that her opponents weren't prepared to defend against. As Maya progressed through the compound, Stone found himself genuinely impressed, despite his determination to find fault with her performance. She was demonstrating not just individual skill, but the kind of tactical intelligence that separated good soldiers from exceptional ones. Every decision she made showed careful thought and professional competence that belied her lack of real combat experience. The third room was where Stone expected Maya to finally encounter trouble. It was designed as a close-quarters nightmare, with multiple targets in confined spaces that would force direct confrontation rather than tactical maneuvering. The room favored strength and aggression over finesse and technique, playing directly to what Stone believed were Maya's weaknesses. Maya paused at the entrance to the room, analyzing what she could see and planning her approach. She understood that this was designed to be her breaking point, the place where her physical limitations would finally overcome her technical advantages. Instead of feeling intimidated, she felt energized by the challenge. This was exactly the kind of problem her grandfather had taught her to solve, finding ways to succeed when conventional wisdom said success was impossible. Her solution was characteristically unexpected. Instead of entering the room through the main doorway as the exercise was designed, Maya used her small size to access the space through an air ventilation system that larger operators couldn't navigate. She emerged inside the room from a completely unexpected angle, allowing her to neutralize threats before they could respond to her presence. Stone watched this maneuver with amazement and frustration. Maya had found a creative solution to a problem that was supposed to test her ability to overcome physical disadvantages through aggression and determination. Instead, she had demonstrated that intelligence and adaptability could be more valuable than brute force, challenging his fundamental assumptions about effective combat tactics. The final room contained the simulated hostage scenario, the most complex challenge in the entire exercise. Maya would have to distinguish between hostile targets and innocent civilians while operating under time pressure and the psychological stress of knowing that her entire performance was being evaluated. This was where Stone was certain she would finally make the kind of mistake that would justify his skepticism. Maya approached the final challenge with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the exercise. She gathered intelligence about the room's layout, identified potential threat positions, and developed a plan that prioritized the safety of the simulated hostage while ensuring her own survival. Her approach was patient and professional, showing none of the recklessness that Stone expected from someone trying to prove themselves. The execution of her final room clearance was flawless. Maya moved through the space like she had been doing urban combat operations for years, neutralizing threats with precision while protecting the civilian. She completed the exercise in record time, with perfect accuracy, and without sustaining any simulated injuries that would have compromised her mission effectiveness. As Maya emerged from the compound with the rescued hostage, the watching recruits erupted in spontaneous applause. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a perfect execution of one of the most challenging exercises in their training program, performed under conditions that would have been difficult for a full team of operators. Stone stood in stunned silence, watching Maya remove her helmet and check her equipment with the calm professionalism of a seasoned operator. Everything about her performance had been exceptional. From her tactical planning to her technical execution to her psychological composure under pressure. He had designed the exercise to expose her weaknesses, and instead she had demonstrated strengths he hadn't even known she possessed. The moment of truth came when Stone realized that he could no longer maintain his position that Maya didn't belong in his program. Every objective measure of her performance indicated that she was not just capable of meeting Special Forces standards, but exceeding them. Her size, which he had viewed as an insurmountable liability, had actually provided her with tactical advantages that larger operators couldn't match. Maya walked over to where Stone was standing with the other recruits, her expression calm but expectant. She had proven everything she needed to prove. And now it was time for him to acknowledge what everyone else could see. That she was exactly the kind of soldier his program was designed to produce. "Sergeant," Maya said formally, requesting permission to report mission completion. Her words were regulation perfect, but there was an undertone of challenge that everyone present could hear. She was asking him to formally acknowledge her success in front of the entire unit, forcing him to choose between his prejudices and his professional integrity. Stone looked at Maya for a long moment, then at the other recruits who were watching the interaction with intense interest. He could feel the weight of their expectations, understanding that his response would define not just Maya's future in the program but his own credibility as an instructor. Every assumption he had made about her had been proven wrong, and continuing to deny her abilities would make him look foolish rather than tough. "Mission accomplished, Rodriguez," Stone said finally, his voice carrying none of its usual edge. "Outstanding performance." The words seemed to cost him considerable effort. But they were genuine. He paused, then added something that surprised everyone present, including himself. "That was some of the finest tactical work I've seen in 15 years of training Special Forces candidates." The admission hung in the air like a physical presence. Stone had just acknowledged that Maya's performance had exceeded not just his expectations, but his experience with thousands of previous candidates. It was a complete reversal of his initial assessment, delivered in front of witnesses who would ensure the words couldn't be forgotten or denied. Maya felt a surge of satisfaction that she carefully controlled, maintaining her professional demeanor even as she savored this moment of vindication. She had spent months enduring Stone's skepticism and proving herself repeatedly, and now he had finally acknowledged what she had always known, that determination and skill mattered more than size or gender in determining combat effectiveness. "Thank you, Sergeant," Maya replied simply. "I appreciate the training opportunity." Her response was gracious without being triumphant, showing the kind of mature professionalism that further impressed everyone present. She had won completely, but she wasn't going to humiliate her former adversary in victory. Stone nodded slowly, then addressed the entire group of recruits. "This exercise demonstrates something important about the nature of combat effectiveness," he said. "Real warrior capability isn't about meeting arbitrary physical standards or conforming to traditional expectations. It's about results under pressure. And Rodriguez just delivered results that speak for themselves." The other recruits looked at Maya with undisguised admiration, finally understanding that they had been witnessing the development of an exceptional operator. Her journey from dismissed outsider to acknowledged expert had been inspiring to watch, showing them that excellence could take many different forms. In the weeks that followed, Stone's relationship with Maya transformed completely. He began using her as an example of tactical excellence, showcasing her techniques during instruction and referring to her performance as a standard for other recruits to aspire to. The change was so dramatic that recruits from other training cycles began requesting transfers to work under her mentorship. Maya's reputation spread beyond Fort Braxton to the broader Special Forces community. Her story became an inspiration for other women considering military careers, proving that barriers that seemed insurmountable could be overcome through dedication and skill. She received communications from female soldiers around the world, thanking her for opening doors that had previously been closed. But perhaps most importantly, Maya had proven something to herself. The small girl who had grown up fixing cars in her grandfather's garage had become exactly what she had always dreamed of being. A warrior who earned respect through capability rather than demanding it through birthright. Stone's initial assessment of her as having pretty face, no grit, had become a laughable memory, replaced by universal recognition of her as one of the finest operators her program had ever produced. The transformation was complete. Maya Rodriguez had entered Fort Braxton as an unknown quantity facing skepticism and dismissal. She was leaving as a proven Special Forces operator, with the respect of her instructors and the admiration of her peers. Most satisfying of all, she had forced Sergeant Marcus Stone to confront his own prejudices and acknowledge that true warrior spirit came in many different packages. On graduation day, as Maya received her Special Forces qualification, Stone was the first person to congratulate her. "Pretty face. Incredible grit," he said with a smile that held genuine respect. "I was wrong about you, Rodriguez, and I'm glad I was wrong." It was perhaps the most important lesson he had learned in his 15 years as an instructor. That being a great teacher sometimes meant being willing to have your students prove you completely wrong.